So this finally happened when it comes to Quant. Gilbert Verdian, who by the way is the CEO of Quant, recently announced how after a decade in the making, basically he says we have published an ISO standard for blockchain interoperability, which I think is pretty cool. After a decade in the making, now nothing I say is financial advice, and I'll talk about the price of Quant later, but I first want to talk about this because I think this right here is pretty interesting in my opinion. He's talking about something called ISO TS 23516 2026, which again, people like to tell me, okay, that sounds kind of complicated, who cares? Well, in my opinion, we have to take a look at the core principle of something like this, right? Again, this right here has a focus on blockchain interoperability. Now, let me explain this real quick and just kind of, I think, give a better understanding as to, I think, the magnitude of something like this. Because if we take a look at interoperability, in this space more specifically, a lot of projects out there lack something called interoperability. Like for instance, there's many blockchains out there, many networks, but because a lot of them are independent of one another, in some cases, they are unable to kind of freely interact with one another, right? In which case, if that is the case, then they do lack interoperability. Like we've seen a lot of projects out there have a focus on interoperability, right? Like for instance, we take a look at Polkadot, we take a look at something like Cosmos, we take a look at Axlar. But if I see something like Quant, again, have a focus on blockchain interoperability, I think that's pretty cool because if I take a look at this space moving forward, I think to have better adoption, to have better recognition, of course, things need to hypothetically have better interoperability, right? It's like, for instance, in a make-believe scenario, which doesn't even have anything to do with this, but I'm just going to make up an example. If let's say, imagine I'm using AT&T and I can't call my friend who's using T-Mobile because we have a different carrier, imagine how much of a hassle that would be. Now, of course, that situation does not exist, in my opinion, but at the same time, imagine if that did, but for the blockchain space. Like imagine if, let's say, because I'm on a certain network, on a certain blockchain, I can't freely interact with another one because, again, it's independent of each other. That's going to kind of impede, that might hinder the growth, I think, maybe of this space if that's not really solved. For instance, in the world of like phones and like, other areas, sometimes that issue doesn't exist, but within this space, in terms of like blockchain technology and all that type of stuff, it just hasn't really kind of developed in ways that other sectors have, but it kind of makes sense. It's still relatively new, right? So if I see something like Quant have a focus on blockchain interoperability, I think that's pretty cool. Sure, of course, being focused on interoperability is a good thing in my opinion, but I don't see a lot of people out there kind of constantly, telling Gilbert Verdian to even work on something like that, right? Or even care about this. Like again, the core focus of interoperability, I think, is of course important, but it's not like a lot of people are kind of asking for that more specifically when it comes to, I think, Gilbert doing things regarding that, right? So I do find this to be pretty cool. I mean, again, I do find this to be pretty interesting, and I think he's putting the extra effort, so I do like that. Now, if I just kind of circle it back a little bit and I take a look at the price of Quant, people like to tell me, well, despite all this though, it's still well below $100. Totally aware of that. It's actually below $70 as we speak. But here's the thing. Is this pullback necessarily such a concern for me? Well, to me, I don't really think about it in that way because, okay, sure, it may not sound like a good thing that Quant is below $70, but if let's say for whatever reason, Quant could just go back to where it was back in, let's say, December of 2024. At that point, Quant was around $140. So we're actually over 2 times lower than that. Over 2 times lower. All it has to do is just go back to December 2024. I'm already going to Sizzler at that point. This is the way to take a look at it. So even if we never ever see maybe a hypothetical altcoin season, if Quant could just go back to where it once was, from where it is as of right now, and again, just go back to like, let's say maybe around $140, which we did see back in December 2024. Let's say in a make-believe scenario did that, I'm going to Sizzler. I don't even need an altcoin season at that point just because Quant is, hypothetically speaking, pretty low as of right now, relatively, again, speaking compared to before. So when I take a look at that right there, I mean, again, I don't feel like I really need a hypothetical altcoin season anyways. If altcoins just return back to the sentiment that we saw not that long ago, I feel like I'm already going to Sizzler. Now, is an altcoin season hypothetically happening a pretty cool thing? Of course, I would think so. I think I'd be pretty happy at that point, of course, but it feels like just because a lot of projects out there have had such a major pullback, it's to the point that if they could just go back to like previous levels in which we saw, slightly over a year ago, I'm already really happy actually in the grand scheme of things, including Quant. Now, could it do that? We'll wait and see. But I don't think December of 2024 was an altcoin season. This is just my perspective. So if it just goes back to that previous level, again, I'm already hypothetically having a going to Sizzler type of moment. At least this is the way I take a look at it. Now, of course, Quant, it's still kind of speaking relatively, down, but that's kind of the point for me in terms of dollar cost averaging. Now, I'm not telling anyone to do anything, right? But this is just my mindset. Preferably for me, in terms of dollar cost averaging, I like it if it's hypothetically at a low point as possible. It doesn't always mean that could always be the case, but if it is maybe the case, then, I'm not going to complain. Now, could Quant maybe hypothetically go lower? Some people like to ask me that. Well, first of all, I have no control over this, but who knows, maybe, right? I mean, I can't control this, but it doesn't change the fact that we're still over 2 times lower than where we were slightly over a year ago, in which we saw around $140. Now we're around $66, right? Around $65. So when I take a look at that right there, I mean, it's not like Quant really needs a hypothetical altcoin season. If it just goes back to that previous level, yeah, I'm not going to complain at all, actually. But here's the thing. Quant has supposedly around 160,000 holders. Typically for a project of that size, like with that many holders, which Quant, it's pretty massive, right? I mean, it's currently ranked 64th in the world as of right now in terms of market cap. And again, with around 162,000 holders, typically a project that is of that size, it's kind of a little bit difficult to just become randomly irrelevant if there was a change in sentiment or a hypothetical altcoin season. Usually any project in the top 100, whether it's a meme or not, typically it's just a little bit hard for it to get forgotten about if, let's say, the market sentiment were to change. So when I take a look at something like that, I mean, do I think Quant is going to randomly become irrelevant? I just don't really have that feeling because I take a look at the amount of holders, kind of the size of the project, even with the pullback. Again, I just have a hard time thinking about it just randomly becoming relevant. So this is why I haven't given up, but I'm not telling anyone to do anything. But if I take a look at Quant anyways, right, in terms of its mission, I feel like it is a pretty unique project to me. Because if we take a look at the Quant network, it's made up of the Overledger OS and the Overledger network. And the Overledger network is actually made up of the Overledger OS users, but the thing about the Overledger OS is that it allows something called a multi-chain application to be built, an application that is built on top of multiple blockchains instead of just one. So for instance, if I want to build like an application that maybe hypothetically takes advantage of the speed of the Stellar blockchain, but at the same time also kind of taking advantage of the security of the Bitcoin blockchain, maybe that could be done through the Overledger OS. This is just a pure hypothetical, but I'm just giving an example, right? So I think that right there is pretty cool. Granted though, do multi-chain applications have the best adoption of all time? I don't think so. Personally, in my perspective, mass adoption in some cases could take quite a while, but I don't think it changes how I still find that concept to be pretty unique, right? That's the way to take a look at it. So I still like the fundamentals when it comes to Quant. Also on top of that, actually, the maximum supply when it comes to Quant is, it's going to depend, right, on the place. But from what I can see, as of right now, it's around like 14.8 million. For whatever reason, in some other places, it showcases like 14.5 million or whatever. But yeah, besides that, let's just say we assume the maximum supply of Quant is around 14.8 million, which from what I can see it is, but in some other places it's a little bit different. But besides that, even if we remove, right, 5 million from the maximum supply of Bitcoin, that's not even the maximum supply of Quant, right? Because, of course, Bitcoin maximum supply 21 million. If we minus 5 million, that's 16 million. Again, the maximum supply of Quant whether we take a look at around 14.5 million or around 14.8 million, that's still not 16 million, right? Again, if we subtract 5 million from the maximum supply of Bitcoin, that's not even the maximum supply of Quant. It's actually even over 1 million more than that, right? Again, 16 million is still over 1 million more than around 14.8 million. Now, does this mean much in the grand scheme of things? Does this mean that Quant is so rare? Well, I don't think it's like to the level of Bitcoin, of course. I mean, Bitcoin's just in a totally different level, but I'm just saying, I think that kind of highlights the supply of something like Quant. And when I take a look at that and I, consider it compared to its fundamentals, I'm still a fan. That's just the way you take a look at it, even though I haven't given up. And I'm still dollar cost averaging once a month, even though I'm not telling anyone to do anything, but that's just personally what I'm doing. However, it's just been a pretty quick update regarding what I saw recently when it comes to Gilbert Verdian, which again is the CEO of Quant, regarding a post he made. I thought that was pretty cool, even, having a focus on blockchain interoperability and even working towards, like, again, an ISO standard, which is pretty cool in my opinion. When an individual, in the case of Gilbert Verdian, has been basically working towards something for a decade and then finally having published, right, an ISO standard for blockchain interoperability. Wow, that's pretty impressive. The dedication for something like that, again, after a decade, that requires a lot of effort, time, and energy. So I do find that to be very respectable. And I just thought it was pretty cool, so I wanted to make a video on it. However, I'll be sure to make more updates when it comes to Quant. So I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you all have a very nice day. And hopefully I'll see y'all on the next video. It's been Lee the Captain. I'm out. Peace. Bye.